It was an extremely underwhelming season for the Toronto Raptors, but along the way, there was some bad, but there was still some good in there. And throughout the season, I gave a lot of predictions, and here's 3 of them that I got absolutely correct. Let's get into it. And if you see this video, you see the thumbnail, you see the intro and think, like, who does this guy think he is? Tooting his own horn, going back and talking about all the things he got right. Well, the previous video that I did on this channel was the exact same video, but it was 3 things I got wrong about the Raptors season. So I felt as though I also needed to do myself a little bit of justice and give you guys 3 of the things that I did get correct through the season, because, you know, I've made over 1,000 videos on YouTube. You know, naturally some things are going to be wrong, but there's also hopefully going to be some things that are right as well. I mean, if there's people watching the content, which there is, thankfully, I got to be on the ball with some things, and here's 3 specific things that I was correct about over the course of the season. Before we get into the first one, remind you guys, this is Amateur Sports 2, the second channel in the Amateur Production Network, where we give you additional Toronto Raptors content in videos like this. Drop a like if you enjoy, subscribe, keep up to date with everything we have coming your way, especially as we get close to the draft and free agency. And speaking of free agency, number 1 on my list, what I was right about for the Raptors this season was the decision to sign Dennis Schroeder. Wasn't correct about the prediction or anything like that about them signing him, but I was correct about the fact that Dennis Schroeder was going to extremely underwhelm Toronto Raptors fans. This was a bit of an interesting saga that brewed with Dennis Schroeder on the team. So when he first signed, it was a disappointing day. It was the day free agency opened up. The Raptors had lost Fred VanVleet to the Houston Rockets. Once again, another asset leaves the Raptors where they get absolutely nothing in return. And when Dennis Schroeder signed, I will be honest, I maybe undersold Dennis Schroeder a little bit, but that came off the emotion that, you know, we had lost Fred VanVleet and we replaced him with Dennis Schroeder. Like, the one-to-one replacement for Fred VanVleet was Dennis Schroeder. But I was adamant that Dennis Schroeder was not going to be what Raptors fans were expecting after his FIBA World Cup success, and I was adamant that when the Toronto Raptors signed him, this was not going to be a suitable replacement for Fred VanVleet, when the majority of the fan base was extraordinarily excited to have a supposed actual point guard, a pure point guard on this team, rather than Fred VanVleet. And what was not accounted for with the decision to sign Dennis Schroeder was the lack of shooting there. He was touted as a player who could shoot. There's a difference between somebody, you know, who can shoot decently efficient like Schroeder, who shoots like 32, 33%. You know, that's acceptable. It actually had a decent shooting season. But there's a difference between that and a player like Fred VanVleet, who, even though he maybe didn't have the most efficient season his last year with the Raptors, he's respected on the three-point line. And his pull-up jumpers are respected. So out of pick and roll, you know, you're not going under that. You're not playing drop coverage against that. You're playing right up on him, which opens up the court for everybody else in the team. Dennis Schroeder did not provide that. So the Fred VanVleet loss was not accounted for enough as a result of signing Dennis Schroeder. It's kind of interesting how this one shifted, though, because as the season wore on, you know, I realized that I had harshly criticized Schroeder for not being Fred VanVleet, and, you know, I was correct that there would be a huge drop-off there, and there was. But once I accepted that Dennis Schroeder is Dennis Schroeder, you know, it's not his fault. He's not Fred VanVleet. Dennis Schroeder was pretty good for the Raptors, all things considered, making money on the mid-level exception. And then people started to have too high of an opinion of Schroeder, which he did not beat. But if you just appreciated Schroeder for what he was a fine point guard for the team, but was correct about the drop-off that was not accounted for in losing Fred VanVleet, replacing him with Dennis Schroeder. People thought the Raptors would be better with Schroeder. Schroeder would be better than Fred VanVleet. That was crazy, and I was correct to call it out at the time. Second thing that I was correct about, and I was correct about a lot of things in this one, but pretty much everything around Grady Dick, I was correct about. So I had my wish list, and I had my prediction about who the Raptors were going to select with the 13th overall pick. First on my list was Wallace. He went 10th overall to the Oklahoma City Thunder, who actually traded up in order to get him because they were at 12 and probably wouldn't have gotten him if they had waited. But I believe they traded up to 10th. Anyways, he was gone at the time of the 13th overall pick for the Raptors. And look who's number 2 on my list. Grady Dick was the highest on my list at the time of the selection. So called accurately who the Raptors were going to draft because he was the highest on my list that was available at the time of the selection. And then once Grady Dick's career started and people were upset about his performances, you know, he didn't get out to a good start. struggled in the G League as well, out the gates. I maintained confidence that this was an excellent pick by the Raptors, and he was going to pick it up by the end of the season. And the main reason was, from watching the games, if you're like box score watching Grady Dick, things did not look good. But if you're watching the games, then you saw there was all these great signs of Grady Dick's game. He was making the right decisions. He was hustling, and just you could tell he had the basketball IQ that did impress me leading up to that NBA draft selection at 13th overall. The shots were just were not falling. So once the shots started to fall, he'd be fine, and evidently he was. And the reason I had the confidence that he was going to be fine, especially shooting-wise, like here's a guy who's literally his entire life been a good shooter. This has been the reason he's been so successful as a basketball player to get selected 13th overall. You're not going to convince me that a guy who's shot the three ball efficiently his entire life is just going to forget how to shoot the three ball in the NBA. Had to get used to the range, had to get used to the difference in distance from the basket, had to get used to the physicality differences, and once he did, he was fine. He was a great player for the Raptors, so was spot on with that one. And I think when he actually breaks into the starting five, I'll be correct about thinking that he is the right guy to be in the starting five rather than Gary Trent Jr. But if Gary Trent doesn't return, then there's no debate there. Grady Dick pretty much has to start, but we'll see on that one. I will be happy looking back on the opinion of trying to get everybody to continue to support Grady Dick. I'm happy that one of the things on this list is a positive prediction rather than the negative first one where I was lower on Schroeder than the masses until I wasn't. And then I'm happy I was higher on somebody than the masses, but we're back to lower on somebody than the masses, and that player is, unfortunately, Jaden McDaniels. So Jaden McDaniels got brought into the Raptors in the might have been same day as Dennis Schroeder, but in and around the same day as Dennis Schroeder, right at the start of free agency, they signed Jaden McDaniels, and I was upset about the signing. Honestly, he was even worse than expected, but the reason I was upset about the signing, I'm not super upset looking like when I was in hindsight, horrible signing. He was terrible for the Raptors. Like, not only was he really bad, he just didn't really give a shit when he was on the floor, which is just the worst thing in my, you can't control always your success as a player. You can always control your work ethic and how hard you play. And Jaden McDaniels, pretty much every time I was on the floor, looked like he'd not give a shit. But looking back, when they did sign him, I thought, okay, decent player, but man, this is absolutely not the player this team needs whatsoever. Does not fit well, and we really needed additional shooting. Jaden McDaniels did not provide that. And people, once again, go to Basketball Reference, see his shooting numbers, and I go, nope, this is not the shooter this team needed. Once again, there's a difference between, you're able to hit threes efficiently, or not even that efficiently, and being a shooter. And I'll admit, again, he was a lot worse than I had expected, a lot worse than I expected him to be. But I was low on this signing from day one. People tried to get me off of that stance. I continued to be low on him, and he played himself out of rotation on one of the worst teams in the NBA, a bottom six team in the NBA. And Jaden McDaniels still couldn't crack that team's rotation. Even amidst injuries like everybody, he still couldn't get a regular rotation spot. That's how bad of a signing Jaden McDaniels was, and unfortunately, the Raptors do have to pay him another $4.5 million next season. So there you have it. 3 things I was right about for the 2023-2024 Raptors. There certainly were some things I was wrong about as well, and I highlighted them once again in the previous video on this channel, which you can see right in the bottom corner over here. But if you want more Raptors content, subscribe to my main channel. If you want even more, you can subscribe to my clips channel, the best stream clips and highlights from the live streams from my main channel, this one right over here that I just told you about. But before you go, make sure you subscribe to the channel you are currently watching on Amateur Sports 2, and I'll see you again next time for another video right over here.